While I've got the tank off this bike, I want to pull the fuel shutoff valve, which I've already done here. It's simply held in place by 2 bolts, and these 2 bolts have nylon crush washers on them. I've started to disassemble this just to get you up to speed. Here's what the fuel shutoff valve looks like. This is the side that you can see. This is the inline filter, the inline strainer. So the first thing I did was just look at this and make sure that all of those screens are intact, and this one is in surprisingly good condition. The other thing that I'm doing is making sure that this O-ring here that makes the seal between the shutoff valve and the tank is still in good condition. If it's still soft and supple and it feels like it's sitting above this rim, then it's probably making a good seal. But it's not a bad idea to replace that since you've gone to the trouble of pulling this off. As we look at the back side, I've disassembled this part here, and essentially the way this works, I believe, is there's some kind of a pump or a diaphragm, and that's what this portion here is. This sits inside of the petcock or the shutoff valve body, and there's an O-ring right here. So I want to inspect that, make sure that's in good shape. The other thing that I recommend you do is make sure that there are no obstructions in here, make sure there's no debris. You could get an air tool and blow some air through here, or you can just put your lips on there and give a little puff of air. That should flow freely regardless on this model of where you have the selector. So on here we have a prime, an on, and a reserve, and I've already blown through here and that's clear completely through, so I don't have any obstructions in there. To get this off there, it was simply 4 set screws, and I've pulled those. Be careful because there is a spring. This spring sits on the outlet side right here, so essentially to go back together, this is going to sit down on there. It's going to compress that spring, and then this whole setup will go in here with the writing up towards the screen. I'm noticing that I'm not getting any air through this nipple here, and I'm just trying to blow through there. So I'm going to take this off and see if there's some kind of an obstruction in there or some kind of a diaphragm. So I've disassembled this diaphragm side, and this is an 8mm fitting right here, and when you pull this out, it's threaded. Interesting thing is there's some kind of material here that's got to be part of that pump. So as you're doing this, make sure that you don't lose this little round cutout, this little round chip. That sits inside of here between the body of this and this fitting. So everything looks good. I can see through all of these holes. There's no obstructions. So I'm just going to clean this up, put it back together, put it on the tank, and we're going to move on. I've cleaned up all the parts and pulled out some cobwebs. So now I'm going to put this back together. First thing I want to do is get this little chip. We'll just call it a chip. And it really doesn't matter which way it goes in as long as it goes in there and lays flat. I'll put this fitting back in. And just to snug that up. Not going to go crazy with tightening that. And we'll bring the shutoff valve in here. And this diaphragm, the plastic that's in between these two, it's got a couple of little posts, and those posts need to go into these holes, so that helps you get oriented. You may want to keep an eye on how this comes apart. I did notice that there, right in here on the other side, there's some kind of an air relief or some kind of a hole that probably allows for different elevations and changes like that, so that this doesn't malfunction. So I'm going to put this back together here. I want to make sure that I get that little diaphragm laying flat, and as I put that in there, just make sure that that black diaphragm doesn't fold up. Now that that's on that side, I can go ahead and put this piece back together here again with a couple of plastic posts that are going to line up with these holes, and then mine goes together with the writing facing up towards that. But on this side, I have a spring that goes between these two. So I'm going to try and just wedge something in there to kind of hold that level. The spring on there, and make sure that that's still in place on the other side. And I'll just drop this down onto that spring, and peek under here, make sure it's in that recessed area. And when you get that together, even without the screws, it should sandwich flat. Now I'm just going to hold that with one hand and get a couple of screws going here. And as I tighten these, I'm going to alternate. And I'm not going to crank down on them until I get all four of them in place. Just give it one quick look around, make sure that that diaphragm didn't get sandwiched wrong. And then just start snugging these down. Like that. I'm ready to put the tank back together, but before I go through that, real quickly, I just went through and cleaned the inside of the tank. I made a couple of blocks here with some old inner tube as gasket. Those were used to seal off the fuel gauge and the fuel shutoff valve. Then took it in, gave it a muriatic acid bath. This is bad stuff, so make sure you got good ventilation, make sure you're wearing gloves. After that, I did a quick water rinse. That'll signify the water. And then I rinsed it out with acetone. As soon as I was done with the acetone, I set it up with a hair dryer on low heat just to hurry and dry that acetone out, prevent as much flash rusting as possible. Well, here's my bucket of parts, and I've got my fuel shutoff valve, and the strainer on here looks real good. I'm still kind of up in the air as to whether I'm going to put an inline filter. And here is the fuel gauge, and here is the cap. Now I'm replacing all of these O-rings that go to these, and just so you know, don't be fooled like I was the first time. These O-rings that fit on here, you can get these at any automotive supply. The only thing you need to do, really there's nothing special, is take your fitting in and just search through their O-rings. Sometimes they have bulk O-rings. Just make sure that it's fuel resistant and you're good to go. So I found two brand new O-rings, which over time will eventually take this shape. They'll fit right down in those grooves. And then I found two new O-rings for the gas cap, which they sit right here and here. So enough talking, let's get this thing back together. Well, the tank's clean. All of the fittings are back on it. Now it's just a matter of putting this back on the bike. Hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching.